What they have done is change the name of the Canadian Yachting Association. It is now called Sail Canada, so I'm sure we're all better off for that. Radio control sailing is now radio sailing in the international racing rules. So the word control is gone. So those of you who thought you were in control, you were mistaken. I'm going to go, I think, quickly through the changes to the right-of-way rules, which are referred to in the rules as Part 2, because the changes are few and they're pretty subtle, and there isn't a lot of benefit to be had in dwelling on them. But if you have questions, obviously we can deal with questions. So what you have there right at the beginning is starts with the definitions. The definition of finishing has been clarified a little bit. It takes into account the fact that when you cross the finish line, you haven't necessarily always finished. You might have another lap to do, you might have a penalty turn to do, you might have hit a mark and you have to go unwind and go back. So really the definition of finish has been adjusted to take into account crossing the finish line isn't always finishing. And that's something that people recording scores have to keep in mind. When you're recording a finish, you write down the order in which the boats go across, and it's quite possible that you'll get one boat 2 or 3 times. Goes across, hits the mark, goes back, comes across again. You write all those down, and later the scorer figures out, well, which one of those was the finish? I think you should know the definition of keeping clear. It hasn't significantly changed, but it's a little bit broader. When boats are overlapped, if the right-of-way boat can also change course in both directions without immediately making contact. So the importance of the keeping clear rule is you haven't discharged your obligations to keep clear of another boat if you haven't hit it. That's not the test. The test is, has it had enough room that if it had to change course, or if it decided to change course, it could have done without just whacking into you. And you have to bear in mind, under the rules, the onus of proof. What happens if you go to the protest room? Who is it that has to show that they were in the right? And the burdened boat is the one that doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. The right-of-way boat says, well, you know, I changed course because I was afraid I would hit him. The burdened boat really has no answer for that unless they can pull out a witness who says, not only was it not close, but no reasonable person could have thought there would be a collision. That's a very difficult onus to meet. If you're the burdened boat and there's another boat even close, you got to start worrying. Have you kept clear? Because it's not a question of did you hit them. It's a question of did they have room to maneuver? And did you keep clear? And they're obliged to avoid a collision if it's a reasonable chance that they might have hit you. So if the rules are designed to make sure collisions don't happen. So if a skipper says, look, I thought there might be a collision, I bore away from the course I would have taken because I didn't want to collide with this boat, even though I was the right-of-way boat. They're going to get the benefit of the doubt. So that's all it takes to commit a foul, is to be close enough to somebody that they might worry that there's going to be a collision. It's not about hitting them. So it's a vaguer test. The onus of proof is against you if you're the burdened boat, so you want to keep that in mind. Mark room is, again, just subtly changed. But it introduces the concept of proper course. So mark room is room for a boat to leave a mark on the required side. So it's broadened the concept of how much space a boat needs to actually make that turn and go around that corner. You have to leave it alone all the way around. So you have to think about the fact that when a boat is turning, its stern goes up and its bow goes down, and so you've got to be wide enough to let the stern come out. If you're trying to go around outside of it, you've got to go further outside than you'd like to go, I'm afraid, but you got to. And you've got to understand that when the stern goes out and it starts to go around, it looks like you can go inside. But when it turns back towards the mark, if you're cutting inside, you're going to hit it, you fouled it. So you have to anticipate that that's what's going to happen. So it's a subtle change that just broadens the concept of how much room you have to give it to make the maneuver that it has to make. The definition of room has changed slightly by adding a reference to the rules under which you have to recognize a boat's needs. You also have to let sort of becomes circular, it seems to me, but if you were the right-of-way boat and you come across a boat that's the give-way boat, in other words, some rule obliges it to keep clear of you, you nonetheless have to be aware that if it has to give room to others, you may have to give room to it to do that. Now, I'm not entirely sure how that works out when you run all these things together, but that seems to be built into the definition of room now. So, having not explained any of that, do you have any questions? Now we plunge directly into part 2, when boats meet, which is not about romance, it's about collisions. Again, there's a slight change in avoiding contact. It is an obligation of the right-of-way boat to keep clear and avoid contact, if reasonably possible. When does your obligation to keep clear start? It says, when it's clear the other boat is not keeping clear, giving room or mark room. I mean, if you want to get hyper-technical about it, if you see a port tack boat coming and it's holding its course even 10 boat lengths away, it's not keeping clear then. So, at what point does it become clear that it's not going to keep clear? You can keep going right till you hit it, and then you say, oh, I guess it wasn't keeping clear. But that's not really what the rule is intended to do. There is a reported protest. 2 Mum-30s were racing, one of them broached. So the result is the boat that had broached was sort of out of control. It was on port on a downwind leg. A boat on starboard on the downwind leg came down, saw this boat was in trouble and was coming in front of it, but it was on port, expected it to get out of the way, left it to the last minute and had to do a crash jibe and risk damage to itself to get out of the way. Both boats were disqualified. The port tack boat didn't keep clear, and the starboard tack boat had some reasonable notice that this boat wasn't going to keep clear of it and left it too late. So there are times, at least sometimes, when you have reasonable notice that this boat's not going to get out of your way. And it is still your job to avoid collisions. I think the rules are increasingly going to be interpreted. You should avoid collision first, ask questions later. And it's not collisions, as David Bose used to say when he gave these talks at this club, collisions are slow. When you hit the boat and you prove your point, boy, I was right. And the other boats go by you while you untangle yourself. So why not just go around them and win the race and not damage your boat, not damage his boat, have some more fun, and sort it out later. The point I wanted to make about the avoiding contact rule change is that it reverses the onus from what it used to be. It used to say that the boat wasn't penalized. So if you were the right-of-way boat, there was a collision, you didn't do any damage or injure somebody, and it's difficult in radio control to injure somebody by hitting their boat, but you never know. It could happen. It used to say you're not penalized. Now it says you're exonerated, which means you are penalized, but you get out of it. It reverses the onus. That's why I went into the talk about when it's reasonably clear that you might hit them and avoiding hitting them, because the onus is shifted again, and it's shifted again towards avoid that collision. Err on the side of not hitting them. And I don't know about you, but there were times when I was helming 35-foot boats that weighed 8 tons. And when there's a boat on port going right in front of you and it doesn't look like it's going to turn, you tack away, because if you don't, you're going to kill somebody. These are the same rules that apply to those boats. Sail like you're sailing an 8-ton boat that's going to hurt somebody if you get it wrong, and err on the side of not hitting them. That's my recommendation. And next time I hit you, you'll say, oh yeah, you talk a big game. Again, there's a slight simplification to the purpose of Section C, which is the part about marks. And in the nitty-gritty of the rules, in 18.2c, sub 2 has essentially been added. Sub 1 says when you have to give somebody mark room, this is what was already there, if you've got that overlap at the 4-length circle After that, it doesn't matter if somebody breaks the overlap or somebody acquires a new overlap. It's too late. Room is required. Now, they've added to that another situation. If a boat becomes overlapped inside the boat entitled to mark room, she shall also give that boat room to sail her proper course. So in addition to giving them room to go around the mark, you've got to give them room to sail their proper course. A proper course is kind of a subjective term in the mind of the boat that has right of way. If it decides that it's going to have to go down and go through this nice little patch of wind and then head back up and go around the mark, well, that's its proper course. And you've got to give it room to do that. So what that's really telling you is inside this circle, when there's already a boat there and you acquire an inside overlap, you've got really very few rights. You've got to be very careful about staying out of the other boat's way. If you see an opportunity there, you better be pretty sure that you've got the speed to shoot through before that boat can maneuver. That's really about your only option. Otherwise, stay out of there, go around them, and live to fight another day. There is another subtle change, and I've really racked my brains to figure out how often this one's going to apply, but it's 18.2e. And again, it's an after-acquired overlap inside the zone that's affected by 18.2. When you acquire an overlap after the fact, or you acquire it by tacking to windward of the other boat, and I really have trouble thinking of circumstances when that will happen, but there are a couple of times when it might. If you're rounding the mark to starboard rather than port, which we usually do, it might be possible. Or if you're on the opposite tack, if you're rounding the mark to port and you're approaching it on port, then you can tack inside them. It won't happen very often, but the point of this rule is if you do get that overlap, after acquired overlap, on a boat that can't go up, it can't get out of your way, it doesn't have to. So there may be times, if there's a boat here, and you come zooming in behind him, and he can't get out of your way because, for example, there's no wind. He's been parked there for half an hour because there's no wind, and you got a little puff and you went scooting up inside him, and you start saying, "I'm here, get out of my way." He can't get out of your way. And if he can't get out of your way, you have to get out of his way. That's what this rule says. And there's another reason he couldn't get out of your way. He might already have a bunch of boats that mean he can't go up and out of your way and give you room to go around. So if you get that after acquired overlap, even if you're entitled to it, if you can't get out of your way, you got to get out of his way. Again, the rules are about let's not collide.
That's if you get an overlap after the four-boat length.
Yes, when under the same conditions of giving mark room, which is when boats are required to leave a mark on the same side, at least one of them is in the zone, and but not boats on opposite tacks, etc. So it's the usual mark rounding situation. At least one boat is in the zone. Okay. Now they've rewritten the entire room to tack at an obstruction rule, again without really making any significant change to it. It's just a little clearer than it used to be, a little broader here and there, but essentially it's the same thing. When you come to an obstruction and you're close hauled, and there's another boat that's close hauled that keeps you from tacking away from that instruction, you shall not hail if you can get away from that obstruction without tacking, if you're not close hauled, or it's a mark and a boat that's fetching it would be required to respond and change course. In other words, you can't make a boat tack away when it's already fetching the mark. So you're prohibited from hailing in those circumstances unless you need room to tack really to avoid hitting this obstruction, basically. So if you're the other boat, if you're the boat that's keeping him from tacking, you have an obligation to respond when somebody hails, even if they're wrong, even if they're calling for room and they're not entitled to room, you still have an obligation to respond. You're entitled to protest, but you also have to either say, there's an affirmative obligation to hail, maybe the only one in the rules, say you tack, in which case he tacks and you keep out of his way. or you tack yourself, which gives them room to tack. In that case, you don't have to say anything, you just tack. And then there's the third part, which is the passing on rule, which is if you're the boat that has to tack to clear the path for the first boat, and there's somebody in your way, you get to hail them and tell them to get out of your way, and they have to do it, basically. They have the same choice. They're put to the same election. They can say you tack, or they can tack themselves.